Well, there we go. So good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us on this morning, the Can You Hear Us storytelling panel and discussion. So we thank you for those that are jumping in via Zoom. We were told we got over 150 people that registered for this Zoom meeting. So I'm really excited, and I thank everybody that joined in. We're also streaming live on Facebook, the Strong Witness Facebook page. So I just want to do a quick introduction and go over some things before our panelists begin to share their stories. First and foremost, I do want to thank Joe, the Practice of the Practice, for allowing us to use this space, allowing us therapists to come on here and share our stories. We know that storytelling is so important. Okay, that's how we get to know people. That's how we connect. That's how we share. That's how we learn about another, is through sharing our stories. I often say we don't truly know somebody else until we know their story and what's behind them. A lot of times in life, there's a lot of judging or, discrimination and things like that. Or even quick to dismiss people because we don't know their story. So I'm LaToya. I am the owner of LCS Counseling and Consulting here in Fort Worth, Texas. I'm also the founder of Strong Witness, which is a storytelling platform. It's a place where people go to share their stories and connect with other people. And so I thank Joe for allowing us to have this space, the Can You Hear Us panel, because we know there's a lot going on in the world right now. We know things are extremely noisy. We know that we're dealing with the pandemic, right? And in different parts of the country, the numbers are spiking up again. And we know that racism is what is in heavy conversation right now. And what we want, there's a few things we want our attendees to go away with today, is the understanding that racism isn't new. It's just something heavy that I think that has a lot of people's attention right now. And that's what, one of the big takeaways, especially for the 5 panelists that have dealt with issues of race. I don't want to speak for them, but I would say, I think it's fair to say the majority throughout our lives. So this isn't something new from May that we just picked up and want to chat about. So when you're hearing their stories, you're hearing life stories, you're hearing life experiences, you're hearing the things that have made them who they are professionally or personally. You're hearing their hearts, you're hearing their pains. And that's why I'm grateful for the people that logged on. And I want you to listen. I know that before we started, it was mentioned too that I just want to give a trigger warning. If it gets too heavy for you, it's okay to log out. It's okay to hit the pause button. It's being recorded. When you're ready, you can find it again and listen to it. That's for those that are triggered by it, that have been traumatized by certain issues and can't handle the discussion. But I also want to say, for those that are the attendees that are coming on to learn, if it does get difficult, I do want you to try to work with it. I don't want you to jump ship because you disagree or you don't understand. I want you to sit in a little bit. The things we would say to our clients, right? Okay, we can't, just because it gets tough, you can't stop counseling, right? After session 2, because we said something that was difficult. Like, you got to press through. And so for the attendees that are watching, I want you to press through. If you find yourself bothered or agitated, begin to ask yourself why, what's going on, and search our own hearts, which is, if there's any bit of change, anytime in life that we want to change and go through something, we got to search our own hearts to see what's going on. So I'm going to introduce the panelists, and then from that point forward, they are going to share their stories. So we have the first person. I'm going to introduce them in the order that they're going to be speaking in, and then from there, I'm going to let them flow and share. And then after that, it's going to be good too if everybody, the attendees, use the gallery view, if that would be helpful. And then from there, also just remember that if you have questions for any of the panelists as they're sharing their stories, I'm going to be looking through the questions. So try to direct it right at that panelist that's sharing. And that way, at the end, when we ask questions, I can get your question right to them. Okay. So the first person that's going to be sharing is William Hemphill. He's a licensed professional counselor. He is the owner of Faith and Family Empowerment and also the pastor of Spring Hill United Methodist Church out of Atlanta, Georgia. Next up, we'll have Shatara Shepard. She's a licensed clinical mental health counselor. She's out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Shatara has a very strong accent. When you hear her speak, you're going to know that she's from North Carolina. She is the owner of Evolve Integrative Counseling. She's a licensed clinical mental health counselor. Next up, we'll have Monique Andrews coming to us all the way from Anchorage, Alaska. So it's pretty early for Monique. So we thank you, Monique, for getting on. She's the owner of A Step Forward Counseling and Consulting. And then we'll have Malcolm Bernard. He's a licensed professional counselor. His practice is in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And the name of his practice is Monday Courage. I love that name. And then our last panelist will be Dr. Holly Sawyer out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And the name of her practice is Life First Therapy. Okay, so I'm just gonna let William go ahead and speak, and the rest of the panelists, if you can just be sure to mute yourselves until it's your time to share, that'll be helpful. And so, oh, William, sorry, William, if you can unmute you, I just unmuted you, then you did it. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and give you your space, and so you can share.
All right. First of all, thank you everybody for being here. Thanks to LaToya and Joe for hosting this, all the panelists for being here, and everyone listening. The story I want to share is back when I was a young, early teenager, about 13 years old. 13 years old, I had moved from the West Coast, Los Angeles, California, to Atlanta, Georgia. During that time was the time when the missing and murdered children were going on. So anybody that was in Atlanta, you probably know about the commercials that happen throughout the day. It's 3 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? It's 6 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? 8 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? These commercials ran all day long to kind of give an awareness a little bit about what was going on. So I'd moved and I was in Atlanta, and I think I just started my school, was in a mostly white area, and I'm walking home from school. This white van starts to follow me. And as I'm walking further, this white van goes, and then eventually the white van starts to speed up. So I no longer walk, but I start running. And I'm running through the neighborhood, and I get here, and finally I couldn't outrun the van. The van stops and corners me. So obviously I'm very nervous and scared about this particular moment, when finally occupants of the van come out, and of course I'm ready to fight. But then I find out it's 2 older kids from the high school. 2 older white kids who thought, you know, this would be a fun prank to play on a Black person. So needless to say, I had all sorts of feelings about that. You know, at the moment I kind of laughed it off, but when I went home, I was mad and of course said a few words. And so that was kind of my introduction to Atlanta and the race issues that went on here at that time. Now for me, one of the things I think it did during that time is it made me pretty hyper vigilant for a long time. I was careful for a while who I was around, made sure I was around more of the Black people who were in my school that was mostly white at that time. And as I became a little more comfortable and some of those folks left, I could begin to integrate and do some things like that. Even as being a member on the wrestling team, and I think it was me and one other person who was a minority, I always had my head on a swivel because I was kind of careful where I went and what I did. And so I really just kind of want to share that story because even in our youth, a lot of times as people who are African descent, we have to be careful where we go, who we associate with, and what we do, just because someone may not like us or think it's funny to mess with us because of the color of our skin. So that's a little bit about my story.
That's good. Thank you for sharing that, William. I appreciate that story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shatara, can you share with us? Go ahead. We can't hear you. It may be your headset. Why don't we, oh, there we go. Now we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you, LaToya, for inviting me to be part of this, and to any willing person that's actually listening. Thank you for opening your hearts to hear our stories. So my story is, I was eating lunch with a coworker. It was actually a late lunch. This was the first day for my children to be back in school. I had a kindergartner, a middle schooler, and a high schooler. It was all their first days. So I'm eating lunch with my coworker, and I receive a phone call. It's my husband. And he says, usually whenever I receive a phone call from him and he's out, my first thing I do is I just sit on the phone for a minute, just so I can see if I can hear background, just because it's a fear. It was a fear every day to wonder, you know, him being out, Black man, middle-aged, dreads. So anyway, he's like, I'm being pulled over by the police. And I'm like, immediately feel sick. It's almost like my heart just kind of stops, just the anxiety, the worry. And I'm saying and in my head, I'm trying to rationalize and hope that maybe he was speeding, you know, so maybe there's some justification of why he's being pulled over, which kind of leveled out that, you know, it wasn't just, I saw a Black man pass. He said, no, I wasn't speeding. He said, he just saw me and he got behind me. So I already knew what this could be and wasn't sure where it would go. So I told my friend, I hurried up and paid for my lunch. I said, I'm going to go. I said, my husband's been pulled over, and where he was at, it wasn't too far. So I'm like, well, just keep me on the phone. And while I'm on the phone with him, I can hear the officer ask for his information. He gives him his information. I hear the officer immediately start telling him, asking him, you know, you have any drugs on you? And my husband's like, no, I just got off of work. I don't have any drugs or anything on me. And he's like, I think I smell weed. My husband's like, no. He was like, I smoke cigarettes. You may smell smoke from the car, whatever. He was like, I don't even have them on me. You shouldn't smell anything. And the officer just continues to go on and on, like, man, just come on, tell me you have weed. Just tell me you have weed, or just tell me you have drugs. I'll sometimes let people go that have drugs or whatever. Just be honest with me. And my husband still just continuously like, look, I'm, you know, he was cooperative or whatever. And he continued to tell the officer, no, I don't have any drugs. So the officer says, well, then allow me to search. And my husband's like, no, I don't have time to search. I want to go home, get showered, to go pick up my daughter, first day of school, blah, blah, blah. So I'm listening and I'm like, oh my goodness, keep me on the phone. So that interaction that dialogue kind of happened for a few minutes. And then the man told him, he said, well, if you do not allow me to search your car, I'm going to send the dogs. And if anybody do not know what sending the dogs is they will call for canines to come out, and the canines will go around the car. And if they bump, that is indication that there's potentially drugs, and that gives them the right to search the car without your permission or a search warrant. And the reason we know this is because they've sent the dogs before with him. And when he say, no, you're not going to search. And they sent the dogs. And if the dog just bumped, he was like, it was just his tail bump. And they were like, oh, yes, the dogs bumped. So that's a previous story. And so my husband's like, I don't have time for the dogs, because, you know, it can take, wherever the dogs are, it can take 10 to 15 or even longer for the dogs to come. And you're just sitting there. He was like, look, man, just go ahead and search. I don't have anything in there. Just go ahead and search. I have to go and get my daughter. And so when I arrive on the scene, I see about 3 or 4 cars, officers. My husband, he's pulled to the back with another officer, and he's standing and they're searching. They're pulling out everything in this car. It's his truck. So I pull in. It was at a gas station. I stopped. I rolled down my window to one of the officers. I put my hands up and said, I'm his wife, and I'm just letting you know that I'm going to go park and I'm going to get out, and I'm going to stand, you know, by the scene. I'm here for support. I'm here for care. He says, okay. So I'm thinking everything's fine. So I park. I get out of the car, and I do not approach the scene. I stay away from the scene because I don't want to escalate the scene or anything. I just wanted my husband to know that I was there, and I also wanted them to know that I was there for him, because I just didn't trust it. I didn't know what they may have done. And so the officer comes and he's approaching me like aggressively. He's like charging after me. And he's saying, I don't know who you think you are. What are you coming on my scene for? And I reminded the officer, I put my hands up and I'm like, I'm his wife. I was like, I just told you that I was going to park and come out of the car and get out of my car. And I was like, I can back off of your scene. That's fine. If, you know, I wasn't on the scene, but I was like, I'm fine to back away. And he was so aggressive in my face. I could feel his saliva hit my face. He was groping his gun. He was groping his taser. And he was like, "You ready to go to jail today, aren't you? You're ready to go to jail today." I said, "Look, I do not want any trouble. I'm just here for support from my husband." And then I can't remember exactly what all he was saying, but he just continued to be aggressive. It was to the point I felt unsafe. And in that moment, I'm thinking in my head, like, oh my goodness, I hope my husband doesn't make an impulsive move or say or do something. It was just so, and then I'm looking at his officers and they're looking as if, they were not in alignment, but they kind of like stopped the search and were kind of looking like they were confused with it. And I said, "Look, sir, I'm not here for trouble. I only have my cell phone and my keys. I didn't want to get out my purse or anything." I said, "I'm only here for support from my husband." And he just continued. He threatened to throw me on the ground. He kept telling me I was going to go to jail. And I'm sorry. So at that moment, I let him know, I was like, "Look, sir, I'm a North Carolina professional counselor," not to throw my title around. I said that to him to let him know that I'm not here to pose any threat. I'm here nothing but for support. I'm not anyone and I said, "I've never been arrested in my life," And he was telling me he didn't care who I was. I said, "I will back up against the store." And he said, "No, you're going to leave." And then I said, "I'll stand at my car, but I'm not leaving." I did not feel safe to leave my husband there for many reasons. And I'm looking around me and there's white people around me. And they're getting gas. And I'm hoping that somebody could intervene or step in to assess or say something. Because at this point, I was nothing to this man. I even told him, I said, "Look, I feel so unsafe. I'm going into the store." I wanted to walk away from the situation and go into the store. He told me, "If you go in that store," he said, "I'm going to give you the scene you're looking for." He said, "I'm going to give you and he kept I don't really know the word other than bullying me and saying, "Go on in there, go on in the store, and I'm going to give you the scene that you want. You're going to get a free ride today." And he kept saying that over and over. So at this point, I just remember kind of being froze. I truly, now that I think about it, I know I dissociated and had like an outer body experience because it was like I was observing the scene now. So and in that observation, when he kept saying, "I'll throw you to the ground," I could just see myself laying on the ground. And in that moment too, I remember thinking, is this what happened to Sandra Bland? Is what did she say or what didn't she do for it to be that tipping point, And I was trying to keep myself in that of like, do not just react, because I could feel my adrenaline going. I felt stuck. I felt froze. I wanted to pick up my cell phone and call 911. But then I'm thinking, if you pick up the cell phone, he's going to shoot you and say he thought it was a weapon. And he's probably going to get away with it. So all of this is just going through my head. I'm thinking, gosh, I hope my husband doesn't, react. And my fear was, there as well. And then I was thinking of Eric Gardner, him outside of a store as well, because I was outside of a store. And I'm thinking, is this how he ended up on the ground? Like, so much was, the more I was trying to cooperate with this man and let him know that I wasn't there for trouble, I wasn't there for escalation, the more aggressive he became. It was like my cooperation enraged him. It's like he was expecting me not to cooperate and cause. And I was so proud of my husband because he was just standing there like, I want to say something, I want to do something, but he knew not. So I'm backing up away from the man and he's still coming toward me. And my husband finally, and I'm looking at his officers too, and I'm like, please speak up, because you could definitely tell they were not in alignment, but they would not even speak up. Mm-hmm. They even stopped the search to like look, but they could not even speak up to say like, that's enough, or, it's this, whatever. So I remember my husband, he put his hands up like this and he stepped to the side and he said to me, "Tara," because he called me Tara. He said, "Walk away, just back up and say nothing else. Walk away. I'm good." That's what he said. And I looked at him and I'm like, okay. At this time, when my husband said that, he had his hands up and he's looking at me and saying, "Walk away." This man done a 360 away from me, pulled his gun, and was beginning to pull it on my husband. My husband go, whoa, whoa, whoa. And he's backing up like, no, man, no, no, no. We're not that kind of people. We don't have no weapon, man. We're good people, man. You know, he's trying to like, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness. And at that time, I realized I was bait. I was bait. It was like his reaction to me was to get a reaction from him so that he could do what he needed to do. At that time, his officers just stopped the search and they said, hey man, they're good. He don't have anything. I don't even really feel like they completely searched. I think that they just wanted to be done, but they couldn't even speak up. So I'm walking away from him and he's like, I know this same officer, he's walking behind me as I'm walking away and his officers are like, they're good. He's saying, I know that, he said, I know you're probably going to go do your report. I'll take you to do the report. I got a free ride for you. I got a free ride for you to do the report. You want me to take you? And he just was letting me know in confidence. He didn't care that I was going to go do a report. He continued to scream that. So it was someone, my husband said it was not him. And he was saying that it was the officer. I just heard someone out of the back say, man, just let them go. They're good. So I'm assuming it was the officers, like, let her go. They're good. When I got into my car, I could not even think to put my car in reverse and back up. My foot on the gas pedal was back and forth because the adrenaline in my body was racing so much that I could barely drive. My husband said that the other officer said to him, said, yeah, he said, just be glad he didn't give you a ticket. It was just because he had his tag was where you have to renew your tag and pay your taxes or whatever. It had expired like a month or so ago, but we were new to the area and all of that for that. I did go do a report and the first person that I did speak with, and I told him, I said, you know, I could barely talk. He was a chief or something. I think he was a chief of the sheriff department. I actually had to go into the township of where it happened. I told him, I said, first, I definitely wanted to say that my husband was racially profiled when he was pulled over. He said that he drove by this officer and he seen the officer seen him. He said there was cars behind him and the officer followed him until those cars pulled off and then he blue lighted him. So as soon as he seen him, he got behind, those cars pulled off. This man said to me, oh, we don't racially profile. We don't see race when we pull over. I knew then my story meant nothing. My story meant nothing. Not even the acknowledgement to say, although we train or we try not, or I hope that my officers are not, I'm sorry, or I hear you, or whatever. He said, we don't see race. And I told him immediately that that was not true. I had enough experiences to know that that's not true. I did file a report. To this day, that was August of last year, do not know what came about the report. I tried to reach out to news outlets to say, you know, if this has happened to me and basically someone that was trying to cooperate, trying to, you know, a therapist that has the de-escalation skills. If I'm unsafe, everyone is. And I guess it was my revelation too, because I've lived in an illusion to feel like that I was. I fear for my life that day. I had to go on anxiety medication and I experienced panic attacks, which watching this stuff that's currently going on now, I had got the panic attacks under control somewhat. They do still come and go. And anytime I see a police officer, my adrenaline's going, I'm tense. I'm thinking, I'm making sure I have my phone near me so that I can have somebody on the line just in case they pull me. And this is where I was if this is my last time. It is constantly every day living in fear with your nervous system. My husband's desensitized from it. He's used to it. And that just goes to show where his autonomic nervous system is at. For me, it was a wake-up call and it changed my life. I don't know what to say to my kids, how to explain to my kids, and I fear when they are older and they're not around me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Shatara. That's yeah, there's a lot in that story, and I hear what you're saying. I know that was traumatizing. Even you sharing it, I can tell it still has an impact because it hasn't even been a year yet. But I thank you. I think that resonated with a lot of people. And it's unfortunate. I'm sorry you and your husband had to experience that, but I do appreciate you being strong enough to share it with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Monique, ready?
Hi, my name's Monique Andrews, and I'm just very grateful to be here and be able to share my story. When I was asked to join the panel and it was explained that we were to choose one story to share about incidences of racism in our lives, I really had a difficult time because there's so many stories. I couldn't figure out which story would present with the most relevant information. I thought about, should I talk about when I went to private Catholic school when I was a child and one of the white students spit in my hair and you could see it was spit, and I went and I told a teacher and the teacher said, oh, it's just rain or water from the trees. And it was a beautiful sunny day out. I wasn't sure if I should talk about when I went to parent-teacher conference with my oldest son at his all-white school, and one of the teachers told me, oh, when your son came in, I didn't know what it would be like to teach him because his skin is so dark. I didn't know if I should tell you the time when I worked in a building that housed a bank as well. And every time I went to work, I needed to prove that I worked in that building because they were afraid that I was gonna do a robbery. And so there was just so many stories. Is it the time the police pulled me over in my own car to tell me they thought my car was stolen and pulled a gun out on me, and then told me I was argumentative when I was trying to explain, this is my car, I'm the owner, I didn't call you and tell you it was stolen. So there were so many different moments where I was like, what should I share? Should I share the anger? Should I share the fear? Should I share the embarrassment? But I decided to share the story of when I worked for an organization as an equal employment opportunity specialist, and my supervisor put on a training, and I probably had worked with him for maybe 3 months at this time. We're getting to know one another. He's Caucasian, I'm African American, have a very good working relationship. And he decides to do an equal employment opportunity training for other personnel who work in the department. And he stood up in front of the training and said, oh, we're gonna learn a lot today. We're gonna talk about things today. We're gonna talk about Chinese people. We're gonna talk about Jewish people. We're gonna talk about white people. And we're gonna talk about N-words, except he did not say it politically correct. And when I heard that, I immediately had a reaction. I immediately, stood up and said, that's inappropriate. That is not something that you should say. I'm very offended. And he says, you know what? I've never seen you get angry before, but I knew the real you would show up one day. You're always so happy and smiling, but see, this is I knew the real you would show up one day. And I was paralyzed with bewilderment, shock, hurt. I felt every emotion collide inside of my body. And I got up and I went and I reported it. And nothing happened. It was in the course of training. He used that word because we might hear it one day when someone files a report and they want to make sure that you can handle it. Of all of the words that one could use to elicit a response, why pick the one that probably is the most inflammatory word in the English history? And so in that moment, I recognized that as an African-American female coworker, and I will throw this in there, soldier, because that's what I was at the time, my opinion, my pain, my voice was not relevant or anything that anyone cared about. And I was made an example of. The other 3 individuals who were African American in that moment said nothing for the rest of the class, said absolutely nothing, because they didn't want to experience the backlash. They didn't want to experience the murmurs and the, oh, that's a difficult person. And I never knew Sergeant Andrews had an attitude. They didn't want to experience that. So they were silenced. And that is the perpetuation of racism systematically that we walk around and experience. Now, this was how I fed my family. This is how, I was able to obtain the things that I have that I enjoy today. And I had to choose. And that is the part that hurts so much. Do I choose to lose this opportunity to continue with this life that I love the way it is? Or do I stand up for my dignity? And that's the piece that a lot of us battle with, the shame and the guilt, because we hear stories all the time and we say, oh, if that was me, I would do this. But sometimes that was me is you, and you make a choice for what's best for your family. And sometimes when you reshare the story, you have guilt and shame surrounding it. And that's the experience that I think changed me and motivated me to recognize that I have to speak up regardless of what may come afterwards, because I want to make a difference for people who follow behind me. So thank you so much for allowing me to share a few pieces of what it's like to be African American in the United States today.
Yeah, thank you, Monique, for sharing that. That was, I know you said you wrestled with which ones you were which story to share. And unfortunately, you had quite a bit. I think you only gave us a small rundown of what you could have shared, but I thank you and I appreciate you for sharing that story. And I'm sorry that happened to you as well. Malcolm, you ready to share?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate you and LaToya and Joe for organizing this platform and giving us this opportunity. I think I'm processing with the stories that I've heard William, Shatara, and Monique share, as well as just kind of walking through. This is not fun, but I get the importance of it. So for me, there's a lot of stories as well. There's being on a college campus and having somebody drive by and shout out the N-word. There's the weekend I'm getting married and I'm pumping gas in my car and somebody drives by and shouts the N-word. And those things are odd and kind of, pause you in the moment. But I think what stands out for me as most impactful is when it involves somebody who is in a position of authority, whether that's a teacher or somebody involved in a work environment, or of course, like, a police authority. So for me, the first experience that really stands out is in high school. I guess I was taking a driver's ed course. And so that was a really, really busy time in my life. I was in a college prep program in high school, taking advanced math, lots and lots of homework, and as well as playing sports on a team. And then this particular driver's ed program, we're just taking place in the evening. So this comes at the end of the day. And one evening, we're in the class and they decide to turn off all the lights and put on this video. And it's kind of playing through different scenes of car accidents and things that have happened. Well, by the end of the day, if you turn off the lights and put on a video, it's not long before I start struggling. So I don't even know when I fell asleep, but I realized I was asleep when I felt the teacher touching my nose with his finger. And he actually, he looked upset, really upset. And I was surprised that he had gone from 0 to 60 so fast, because I was very introverted, very quiet, afraid of getting in trouble. My dad was a pastor, my mom was a teacher. So I really just kind of wanted to get by and not get called out for anything. So I didn't even think there was any history between me and him in the class, or that he really even knew who I was, to be honest. But he was very upset and he said, "You're going to have to stand for the rest of the class." And he seemed deeply offended that I had fallen asleep. So, I stood, I'm just kind of like, okay, I'll follow the rules, just do whatever. And it was really embarrassing and odd because, my family were paying for this driver's ed course, and I'm 16 years old at this point. But when you're a kid, you just kind of go with the flow on all kinds of weird stuff. So I'm on the way home with my dad. He's picked me up, and I'm just kind of talking through with him, and I tell him what happens. And it's just like, telling him that I was tired and that I fell asleep and I had to stand up. And all of a sudden, he whips his car around in a U-turn. And I was so shocked. I'm like, whoa, what's going on? And this is like an 89 town car, and that doesn't U-turn so easily. So I'm whipping to the side of the car. And when we're heading back, and he doesn't say anything to me. And I don't think I even could process or understand like the injustice or what had happened or what it meant to be touched on the nose, touched, physically by, a white teacher in this environment, and then made to stand. And so we head back, we go in, and my dad starts knocking on the door of the classroom because the next class has started. Guy comes out, and my dad's, kind of talking with him, clearly upset. And the guy actually starts getting offended that my dad would raise an issue with him touching me, with him making me stand, and starts pointing his finger at my dad and going off. So at that point, my dad's done with him, and he goes into another office. I don't know who he found. I don't know what he said. I just know when I got to the class the next week, that instructor was gone and we had a new instructor. So for me, I look back on that, and I guess my takeaway, or what I took away from that, was how closely I had to watch and be careful for my sons, because I realized we're human and we're American, mostly. Most of the time I'm American, and most of the time I'm a citizen of planet Earth. But there are pockets, there are situations where my citizenship can be suspended. And so for me, that was a powerful situation. I realized my kids, just because they were born to me and just because they look like me, they were at risk for that as well. They might be punished differently in school, just because the odds are that the teachers weren't going to look like them. And so there was going to be a lack of familiarity culturally, physically. So they would be, chances are, singled out differently. And that just stood out for me because I'm lucky. I had a dad who, stood up for me, saw what was happening, and was willing to fight for me. And a lot of people don't have that, or just the person doesn't happen to be there. And then the other powerful thing is just that kind of secondary knowledge of, I don't walk around thinking about the fact that I'm Black all day, but there'll just be these moments where all of a sudden the sharp reality will hit. And that's one of those. Or there'll be a moment where I'm casually talking with somebody, and I think we're just two people talking, until they mention, I did this for this Black person before. Oh, I actually have somebody who, my daughter, she has a Black friend. And then, and I get, they don't mean it to be evil, but all of a sudden it's like this waterfall cascades, like of consciousness cascades down my brain. And it hits me. We're not two people talking. They're seeing me through the lens of, I'm a Black person. It's like, okay, yeah, I forgot in that moment I was Black. And they, in a subtle way, just reminded me, you are, and I'm never really going to get to see past that. And so that's a lot of what those moments are like, is just, nope, I'm not just another citizen of planet Earth. I'm not just another American. I have an otherness. I'm kind of an alien race at times. My patriotism is expected, my loyalty is expected, my obedience to the laws are expected, but they don't always count for me. So say all that to say, I appreciate the opportunity to share and express this, and the courage that it takes for anybody to hear it and to listen to these hard stories.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Malcolm. That's you said a lot of good stuff. I know when we get to the question and answer period, there's things that we want to pull out of that. But even when you know, the things you talk about of things don't always count for me. You know, it's out there, it's said, but do I really get those privileges, or do I really get to take advantage of those things? Or, you know, I think that's a huge discussion in itself. But I thank you for sharing your story. And I think you had I thank God you had a father that was able to stand up for you when you needed somebody to stand up for you. So that was good. Dr. Holly, you ready to share?
Yes, I'm ready. I want to thank everybody for signing up and joining us today to give us the time and attention to hear all of our stories. Thank you, Joe, for this platform. Thank you, LaToya, for moderating and allowing all of us to share our stories. Like Monique, I struggle too with trying to just nail it down to just one story because, you know, these events, if you want to call them that, they happen from the time you become conscious, you know, as a kid, as young as third grade, all the way up to the current day of adulthood, where you have these occurrences. So today, I think I want to talk about what racism for me kind of looked like coming from the Midwest and then moving down to the South. You know, up north, racism is hid behind liberalism and being an ally. You smile in my face, but then behind my back, it just looks a total different story. But when I moved to Louisiana for undergrad, I remember getting a job, and I was working at a buffet. I won't name it, but I was working at a buffet. And I remember having a certain section, and anybody who was a server knows that you were assigned a section. It doesn't necessarily have to be the same section, but I remember going in, and it was a Thursday night, I'll never forget it. And I had the big event room. And so I noticed like a bunch of like a big party started to come in. And I was getting ready to set up, make sure everybody was, you know, okay. I was excited because I could imagine what the tips were going to be. And my supervisor came over to me and says, you can't serve that section. And I was like, but that's my section. No, I'm going to move you over to the other side of the restaurant. And I was like, well, why? Why can't I serve in this particular part of the restaurant? And he was just like, not tonight. You won't be able to serve this party. I'm going to have so-and-so at this party. And I was just bewildered. I was frustrated. I was upset. And when I went to the other side of the restaurant, another coworker came up to me and said, listen, on Thursday nights, the Klan meets here. And they request that only white servers serve them. So that's why you're not allowed to serve that party. They all walked in, overalls, plain clothes. Yes, the red hats. Yes, the camouflage hats. They went in, they shut the blinds. And again, only white servers were allowed to go in and serve them. And I was just like, wow. You know, sometimes when you talk about the Klan, people would think, okay, sheets. No, they're in plain clothing and they are allowed to congregate. And I was just really like a taken back. And later that night, I had a couple that came in. And, you know, usually people tip their servers. So this particular couple, their tip to me was a penny. And when he placed the penny, he placed it face down. And he wrote on the receipt, because you leave the receipt on the table when you serve at a restaurant. And he said, thank you for all you do. And he literally took Lincoln and turned them down just to represent that, you know, this is the South. Lincoln was a traitor. And I was just like, wow. And what it made me realize is that in the South, you are made aware that, okay, you can't go in certain places. You are only to be with your people, because if you come into this place, you have to prepare yourself for racist experiences. being denied access. And again, up north, I wasn't used to that. I was used to the covert racism and not the overt. So it just really opened my eyes up to just see how different the country is split. But then it also showed me a true lesson in history. The South wanted to keep the slaves and the North didn't, but it still was a different way of experiencing and viewing racism. But I will never forgive that. Thank you for allowing me to share.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That was a tough night, like serving those tables or at that restaurant period. But thank you for sharing that, Dr. Holly, and thank you all for sharing your stories. I'm looking at the comments on the Zoom. I'm looking at the comments from the Facebook, and even I'm getting text messages on my phone, just saying, how heavy your stories are. Somebody even texted me and said they're gonna need therapy after this from watching and listening. And that's something that we brought up, Dr. Holly brought up before we even got started, that this could be triggering for some people because it is heavy. And even listening to your stories, some of your stories, Shatar, I heard your story before, but even hearing it again, it's like, I can feel the emotion, Monique, hearing your story, I'm angry. Like, it makes me so bad, Dr. Holly, I'm wondering, how'd you stand there? Like, I don't know. I think Monique made a statement, like when people say, I couldn't have lived through that time. I'm like, well, I don't know how either. But the thing about it is that I don't know how you stood there and watched people walk through that hated you, and where you worked at was okay with it, serving people with this level of hatred. Malcolm made a great point too. Like, listen, you tell me I'm afforded all these rights, but really you treat me less than. I know I'm Black. I wake up Black. I'm born Black. I'm gonna die Black. I'm Black in this office. I'll be Black at home when I get back there. But you remind me daily of how you see me, right? And it's hard. Even William sharing his story of peers in school. And it's hard. So Monique had the same story, like growing up, and if you're in a predominantly white school, they'll say things, and sometimes with evil intent, and sometimes they, people think it's funny. It's not funny, or you're doing things and they want to brush it off. And so what you all said was extremely powerful. What you all said was it was heavy, and it happens more often than not. And that's the takeaway too. I want people to get, for the attendees that are on the Zoom and Facebook. This is not just a one-time thing. This is not some fluke type stuff. Like, for everybody's story, it's probably, unfortunately, it's probably happening now somewhere, what you all just shared and experienced. So I want to remind people that they are more than, we want you to ask questions, and I'm going to field the questions as they do come in. But I do want you all to talk about, I think, Malcolm, if you can expand on this one. You said that we all have a choice to choose to be quiet or to stand. And even now as professionals, even now as Black people in America, even the allies, right? We all have a choice to either to be quiet or to stand. I believe that was you, Malcolm, that said that, either you or Monique. But if you can just expound on that some more, like, what does that mean? And like I said, if you guys have questions, please send them in, and I'll make sure I'll get them asked to the panelists.
That may have been Monique, I think, maybe in the context of, but I'll just say quickly, and Monique may have something to add to that, that I think it leaves you in a position where this idea of be quiet or stand, you're in a position where you have to accept that you're going to get hurt either way. You're either going to swallow it and you're going to massage the situation so that people feel comfortable, so that people feel safe. I think that's a coping mechanism maybe that I have sometimes, is brush it off and keep the peace because I just personally like harmony. Or you're going to stand up and speak to it. And anybody who's seen the Chappelle Show remembers these sketches called When Keeping It Real Goes Wrong. And, you know, whenever he kept it real in the context of the sketch, his career usually fell apart. His relationships usually fell apart. It's like speaking up to microaggressions, speaking up to subtle biases usually led to some drop in social status, some drop in professional advancement. So you just have to go in knowing that you're gonna hurt either way, and which path leads to the minimal pain, or do I feel like fighting today?
Monique, did you have something to add to that? Sorry about that, Malcolm. I thought you said it. It was Monique.
It's all good.
Yeah.
No, Malcolm did an excellent job. He dropped the mic with that. So
Okay. We have a question here. What is one thing that you would hope white allies would start doing, and one thing that you would want them to stop doing? What do you want white allies to start doing? Like you would hope, even from hearing this conversation, put this in action, and then one thing you want them to stop doing going forward.
I think I'll start a little bit on that, just thinking about that. And I might say to start in two ways. One, I think this was so powerful because for everybody who was on here, you took the chance to listen to us. Non-judgmental and just taking our stories for what they were. I think that's the first thing, because one of the things I have seen so much over the years, and then even doing some of this, is a lot of times people might quote unquote listen for a moment, but then dismiss. And when you're dismissing us, you're dismissing our pain, you're dismissing our hurt, you're dismissing our experience, but also you're dismissing the chance to educate yourself and learn about what we are going through. So I'd say the first thing I would say is listen. And then I'd say with that, and this would probably take the bigger courage, when you go back into your own communities, daring to tell those stories and to stand. One of the things I remember is I was in a discussion at a church, mixed race congregation, and we were trying to do some things on race after the Trayvon Martin killing. One of the things that I think, and I understood it, but it bugged me at the same time, was a lot of the white Anglo parishioners were saying, okay, I agree with you, but if I go talk to Uncle Charlie, Uncle Bob, or to my dad or all this at the table, I'm going to get ostracized or criticized or this or that, whatever else. It's tough, but sometimes that's part of the cost of being an advocate, because we deal with that already. And so I more so look at it as, okay, probably pairing those two together. And then what I would wish would stop is just insisting that we had to tell the story. You can ask, but give us the freedom to be able to do that, because this is traumatic for all of us. I imagine, and I don't know, my panelists can say this, I know for me, even hearing everybody's story and telling my own is tough and draining. So I know even after this, I have to regroup for a few minutes to get my energy back to do what I need to do, because this is not easy work for us. So that's what I would say.
Holly or Shatara, do you have an answer to that? What do you hope your white allies would stop doing, and what do you hope they'll start doing?
One thing for me, stop minimizing. That when someone do share a story or say this is how I felt, whether that be, just as Monique says, there were so many stories, I was like, which one? And for one, that kind of I was struggling with was speaking up. When we were, I was at a government agency at that, and that's when the DC I forgot his name. That's so weird. His name just left me. What had happened in DC with the guy that was in the back of the van and he ended up dead. They were, marching and protesting and rioting, and there was a group of white coworkers that were standing around talking about it. I voiced, me and another coworker, that this doesn't feel good. I don't want to hear this on my job, was the minimizing. And then what we experienced after that was retaliation. So calling, kind of piggybacking back off of what Mr. Hemphill said, William had said, was calling each other out to say, and we do it as Black people. I remember growing up having to, don't say, or don't act this way because this is what the consequences are. And so you had to live in that uncomfortableness and kind of boxed of how will this be perceived, and as being Black in predominantly white places. So as a white person, calling each other out. Law enforcement, if you're the good apples, calling your bad apples out. That's not acceptable. That can't happen. If you're white people and you see that some altercation is happening, such as our situation or whatever, maybe stand back and observe. I can understand to an extent, because you're not sure what's really going to take place. But we felt like we were criminals, me trying to look around and hoping somebody could step in and assess, and I'm like this. So if you see somebody doing this and they're a Black person, maybe can I help? Is there anything that, whatever may happen, speaking up and stop minimizing, checking your own bias, checking your own self. It's huge.
Thank you for that. Dr. Holly, did you have something?
I think I'll definitely agree to say that if you see something, definitely say something, because not saying something and you're seeing it, that is being complicit to what your white counterparts are doing. But in addition, I think what I have found helpful as a professional, if you're in a position where you can help a Black person, thrive, share the resources. Like, for example, I never knew Joe, but I knew about Joe, and Joe was willing to give us this platform to share our voices. It doesn't always have to be a monetary donation, but if you have a resource and you see, a Black professional on LinkedIn, they're trying to, get a job or just fundraise or do different things, share the resources. It doesn't, again, have to, have a monetary value, but I think there are just spaces that as Black people on purpose, we're not able to penetrate for whatever reason. That definitely relates back to our race. So if you are considering yourself as a white ally, then be able to be in those spaces and share the resources.
Thank you, ma'am. Here's another question. As clinicians, how do we help our clients to navigate the many thoughts and emotions that come with what is happening and has happened in regards to race? So as clinicians yourself, how do you even help your clients navigate this? I'm not sure, this question was asked, I'm not sure if, and I don't know if you want to clarify this question, if you mean the Black clients or any client, but well, let's say that even for your Black clients that come in, how are you helping them to deal with these issues of race and the emotions that come with it? Anybody want to answer that?
I'm thinking of two things, because I think I'm thinking about if you're a Black clinician and then maybe if you're a white clinician. So first of all, as a Black clinician, I know I've had many discussions. And so some of it is obviously identify with me just based on the color of her skin and different things like that, but providing that container where you can hold that experience and talk, identify, bear witness, and walk through together, even with some of the trauma. So that's a lot of what I've done as a Black clinician working with my clients. Now, the other thing that I thought about, because I imagine there are some white clinicians on here, I'm reminded of a little bit something that my supervisor said, who was white. He said when he had to deal with issues of race, first of all, he says, I am not a Black person, so I know I don't understand. Please educate me and help me to support you in the best way possible. So what he was doing in that case was saying, I don't have all the answers, And I'm not even going to pretend to have all the answers. Help me to help you in the best way you possibly can. And so with that vulnerability, that has allowed him to help some people navigate with some of these things. So those are the two things that immediately come to mind from both those perspectives.
For me, I treat racial trauma the same as any trauma that produces symptoms that are stress related, you know, PTSD, those types of techniques. What I also would say, I want to circle back with the question about allies, what they should and shouldn't do. I think one of one of my biggest pet peeves is when someone attempts to be your ally in this pain, in this racial trauma, then we have to then turn around and comfort the ally and make the ally feel better about their particular space in the event. And that's exhausting. We need support. We need the comforting. And so I just want folks to recognize that the sometimes the tears, sometimes the over and over, I'm so sorry, what can I do? It leads to the person who has been traumatized racially to then turn around and have to comfort you. And that's exhausting. It makes folks kind of like, I don't even want to get into it with so-and-so today because I don't want to put forth that energy to now make them feel better about the situation that's happening. So just keep that in mind.
You're
mute.
You're mute.
Sorry. Listen, remember I said, listen, as long as I hit play, record, I'll be good. I just got to remember now to hit unmute when it's something for me to share. Here's another question. And I'm going to try to read through it. I'm not going to try to summarize it real quick. It says, this is coming from somebody. It says, I'm a multiracial Mexican, Spanish, Italian, and I'm the only one in a small Bible study that is not Black or African American. I recently shared with them last week, I had an encounter with a white woman jogging behind us who told me, my 5-year-old and 13-year-old Black child in my care, to move out of her way so she could continue using the sidewalk. I told her to go somewhere else with her right privilege, but the Black women in my Bible study said I shouldn't have said anything and that she should be Christian first instead of being angry. Her question is, was I wrong? And how do you speak truth in love at that time? Pastor, I see you getting, you revving up. So you might as well just go ahead and.
Can I share or is someone?
Yeah, go ahead, Holly.
It's all it kind of touches back on what Monique is pointed out, in that when somebody of color or Black experience something like that, the onus is always on us. What the person said to this person who wrote you the question was wrong. So why was the responsibility on them to be Christian-like? Why wasn't the responsibility on that white woman who told that person that to just be a better human, to not even do the infraction in the first place? I think when we tell people, oh, turn the other cheek, it doesn't give people a space to not only express them anger, but be validated in their anger when they're done wrong. I think that you can also check somebody in a polite way where it doesn't have to come off egregious or rude, but you still should be able to be in a space that if somebody has done something wrong to you, that you can protect yourself so that it doesn't happen again. And I think that is coming from a place of love. Because if I love myself and know that what you did with me was wrong, I can say something to you in a very loving way that you can at least understand that that was wrong and you won't do it again. It's kind of like, I'm a mom and I have children. I love them to death. I can chastise them without being angry, rude, and them, feeling scared or afraid. But I don't think not saying something to that person would have helped the situation. You know, white people say, educate me, educate me. That's not our job. But if you have offended me and you said something that was racist, you said a microaggression, then yeah, it is my place to let you know that that was offensive, and it was definitely demeaning. So I think the person did the right thing by saying something about it, because if we love ourselves, again, we have to stand up for ourselves. And we can say it in a way that is just not egregious.
Thank you, Holly. Anybody else have an answer for that one?
I just want to say amen to Holly. The only thing I would add into that, I don't know where people get this perception that you have to be a doormat because you are a Christian. You are a human being. I could go into a theological lesson about turning the other cheek, but that's not for here or today. The point is that if you're talking about doing unto others as we have them do unto us, part of it will be letting people know that what you did was disrespectful to me as a person. And then not to mention, if you reverse that, say, and how would it feel if that happened to you? And so that's just what I would add to that.
Thank you, William. There's a lot of questions coming in. I know we got not too much time left. So one of the questions is this one came through by text for me. How can, especially when we've been in environments, and I think for the most part professionally, a lot of times, academically in classrooms, where we may be the only Black professional or student in the room. What words or advice can we give to our white colleagues to help them to even, what do we need from them? Like, do we need them to do something special to make us feel special? Is there, you know, because the question is basically, okay, when I'm in a room or in an environment and there's one other Black person, what can I do to make that person know that they're welcome in this space too?
Same thing you do with the non-Black people. Be nice, be kind, be courteous. Treat them like you treat everyone else. Be inclusive. Don't have conversations like Malcolm said, you know, oh, I've got a Black friend, or, you know, or even share. I've been living in Alaska. There's many spaces where I am the only African American, or a very few are in the room. And people tend to always want to tell you how they were raised by people who were super racist. And I'm totally not like that. My dad was racist and I had just try to stay away from that. Just treat individuals like you would treat anyone else. You wouldn't necessarily be in a space and meet someone and the first thing you start talking about is, you know, their Caucasian or whiteness. So don't do it when you're speaking with an African American person, or you're introducing yourself or getting to know. Get to know them. Talk about whatever your favorite sport is, or, you know, shoes for me, pocketbooks. You know, don't immediately be the first to bring up race.
If I may, I've been that in so many situations. My last situation probably was grad school. For me, asking me whether if you're coming to somebody and they're the only Black person in a predominantly white space, whether that be in a classroom, workplace, or whatever, for me, I would appreciate to acknowledge it, because I think that kind of goes into colorism, that we don't see race when obviously I'm sitting here and you see me and I am sticking out. And to say, how does this feel? You know, are you comfortable? I see you, I get you, I support you, and I'll even help stand by you when you do say this felt like a microaggression, or this did not feel safe, or, you know, open in that space. For me, that's how I feel. And even professors that teach grad classes or teach undergrad classes, when you have that minority or that Black person and they're the only one in there, having that conversation about what racism is and being that anti-racist and talking about covert racism, overt, and then like the microaggressions, and to say that, you know, it will not be tolerated, to make that a definite standstill, and to invite the person that if you ever feel uncomfortable or unsafe or unsupported, I welcome you. You have a voice. We want to hear you. To say that, because it is real, and it does sometimes come out more so. For my experience, it was very unintentional, but my DNA felt it every time. And I would go home trying to process, is that, you know, and trying to compartmentalize, well, I know they're not, but, and, you know, even wanting to go back and say something, and then to you know, have it, it's just so much. So even just, let's bring this out in the room, let's have these rough conversations, and let's invite this person to feel safe enough to call us out on our BS. That's how I feel. I'm sorry.
Thank you all for that. We got another question. You ready? We got a few more. It says, how do you speak to white clinicians so they can use their position to support anti-racism beyond one-to-one interactions of respect and listening? So what other suggestions do we have for white clinicians to use their platform besides just speaking to somebody over having coffee or here? Like, what's a bigger way they can do it?
I think one of the greatest gifts that we can give people is just maybe awareness and understanding of a little bit of what it's like to walk in their shoes. I think that's what makes counseling so special, is that all kinds of people come in our offices and they just get to have a space where, without judgment, without criticism, or without having to prove the validity of their story, they get just to be who they are. And I think I would tell white clinicians, you can do that in this context by, you know, as in grad school, one of my professors required and just immerse into
battery.
Sorry.
100.
You gotta unmute yourself. Okay, well, we'll wait for that one. Anybody else have a answer to that one? I'm not sure. You there?
Am I back?
Yeah, now you're back. Go ahead.
Okay. Praise God for technology. All right. So I think where I may have left off is one of my professors in grad school required us to just go into different cultural environments, be in a place where no one else looked like you, which that wasn't that strange to me. That happens a lot in my life. But what I saw the benefit of it was it could give a white clinician opportunity to experience what is it like for Blacks or Asians or someone who's Latino to be in a room where it's basically homogenous except for them. And I think that's a real gift you could give of that type of awareness. Go find another cultural group, Black or otherwise, some sort of social group. That's harder to do nowadays because of what's happening with the pandemic, but essentially just let yourself feel, what does it feel like to be in a room surrounded by people who just don't look like you and they're of a homogenous group. So essentially you feel like you're the only one. How do you breathe? How do you feel in that? And how do you breathe when you step out of it and go back to your comfort zone? And you can appreciate what minority groups go through all the time, because we have to live very often in that gravity and in that type of situation, and you learn to deal with it, but you can forget how heavy it is until you don't have it.
Okay, here's another question we have coming in. Do you believe that every interaction between people of different races or ethnic backgrounds is racially motivated? And how do you speak to that question from people that believe that's true? I guess do you believe that, I'm thinking this person, and you can clarify if I'm getting it wrong. Do you believe that every exchange, like every tense conversation or disagreement has race behind it? Is race behind every disagreement? And then how do you address that question?
I just want to speak very quickly and say no. And that's another thing that I find myself, and I've colleagues that were of Black and family and friends, is we would maybe often hear, you're pulling the race card. No, it's not that easy. That's not how it happened. We don't want to. So we'll show up in spaces oftentimes to present well, to be friendly, to be professional, all of the above, and to try to compartmentalize and rationalize. Maybe it was this, or maybe I need to do that. So I say that to say that the race card is often the very last card for many people that are conscious and want to be open and know that this world is something that, you know, we have to navigate. So absolutely not. I don't think every conversation, but I do feel like that our epigenetics, our DNA, there's something about that that lets us know. It's like the hairs on the back of your neck that stands up to let you know there's something else to this. And usually trust in that part, trust in your body. The body keeps the score. It's in our somatic system. So no, I don't believe every intense conversation is always racially motivated. No.
Okay. All right, here's another question.
I think it just depends really on the person. I think it's, you know, you have to kind of judge it by each experience, because not everybody is like, you know, going in and thinking like, oh, I'm going to have this conversation to offend you because you're Black, or if I have this conversation with my white colleague, they're going to say something racist. I really just think it really just depends on the conversation and the two people that are having it, because some people are racist, just flat out, and some people are not. So I think that's more subjective than to kind of just paint it with this broad brush, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I agree, because I think everybody brings their own experiences to a conversation. So the person of a different race is bringing all of their experiences. I'm bringing all of my experiences, and how we interpret depends on that conversation that we're having. And everyone is different. Everyone is different. And so it's kind of up to us to gauge, you know, what is this specific person's intent. And sometimes that's hard because racism is bizarre, right? It's bizarre. And so sometimes it's really hard to gauge what this person's intent is when you're having a conversation or interaction or a disagreement. Is it racism, or is it this person's particular personality? So it's tough. That's a tough one.
If I can just add, and then I'm going to allow you to go on. Something come up for me with that was, I think two people say racism and they're thinking of the very obvious, overt. Checking your implicit bias. So are you saying this to me because you feel that I am inferior? Are you saying this to me because you feel like that your words mean more? So really checking your own implicit, and in that conversation, them intense moments, why are you, and what reason made you safe or comfortable to say that? So.
Okay. Thank you all. Here's another question. As a professional, how would you advise Black clinicians or people of color to take care of themselves right now? What do you do to work through and manage this intense time? So for yourselves, what do you do? And then how would you advise other people of color to take care of themselves?
I personally organize and structure myself, and I just live day to day. Now, there are things, of course, that may have dates attached to them, so they, you know, of course, are organized according to that. But I just keep some structure so that, you know, I know what I'm doing, you know, from the time I wake up to the time that I just decide, you know, today's enough. I make sure that I allow time to transition between tasks, because a lot of times we can go, you know, through an 8-hour workday and not really stop and pause. So for me, when I schedule things, I make sure I include 30 minutes between each hour so that I could maybe take a walk, eat lunch, just chill for a minute. But I think having intentional self-care and scheduling whatever it is around that is very important, because, you know, even during COVID, post-COVID, prior to COVID, people were just moving about their day and their life and not really being intentional. And I think, COVID has allowed us to really slow down and really regroup. And I think this is a good time where if you were not someone who was structured, who allotted that time for yourself, this is a good time to start that practice.
I think I would add to that in the sense, what is your community of support? And I'd say thinking intentionally about that, because especially during COVID, you might not normally do the things like you normally do, go to the church building or gather with different people. And so making intentional ways of doing that. So in my case, a lot of times it's figuring out times where I can talk to some of my loved ones, some of my family via phone, intentionally FaceTiming and trying to get people together, doing different things like that so it can maintain some sense of connection and community and some presence with people who just love you. And so that's what I'd say, your community of support, finding ways to connect.
For me, something I do as a Black therapist, and I definitely had to do with all this going on and re-triggering, is listening to my body. I have to get into, again, we hold this trauma in our body, it's in our system. So we're watching and we're constantly hearing what's going on and whatever. And that body is knocking the brain off line. So we're not even able to access, to be able to think. So body movement for me, meditation, yoga, rest, taking a break from social media, taking a break from the TV, reminding yourself that, you swim in other people's energy and emotional stuff. And then now you're having to deal with your own. Go ahead and reach out to your own therapist. Like, therapists need a therapist, and a Black therapist right now definitely needs a therapist so that you can process and your anger and your hurt and your feelings can be validated. Because it's a lot and it will wear you down and it will burn you out. So yeah, body movement, rest, taking a break, go to a safe place, and just focus on right then and there, whatever that may be with your family, to have the laugh, to have the fun.
Okay. And we have about, less than 10 minutes left on this webinar. I want to make sure that I do get to a point. I don't think the person's in the chat anymore. I think she messaged me and said she had to go. But she made a statement, especially when Shatara was sharing her story. And this is for you moms, especially. I think everybody on here, 2 Black males, and I think you all have sons. She says she holds her breath every time her husband leaves the house until he comes back home. Her husband's a Black male, right? So let's talk about that. Even, William and Malcolm, that experience is, I know that we shouldn't live in fear, but we also have to take precautions and be safe and be alert and understand that these times are difficult and really address what's going on in life right now. So even that experience of, okay, somebody else could be just getting in the car and going to the store. But when you get into the car and go to the store and go to the register and check out and always have your bag and have your receipt, is different. So just speak about that experience too, even as Black men. Either one of you can answer.
I think I can totally connect with that, and I can understand whoever asked that, the fear and the anxiety inherent in that. I think it's just important to not let these things control and get in the way of our living. I mean, we got a lot of life ahead of us, God willing, and I think whether you connect with a sense of faith or some other, philosophy of meaning, you have to kind of just take a position of, I'm going to be as wise as I can. I'm going to be as careful as I can. Almost the same mindset you take to surviving in this pandemic. I mean, take as much care as possible, be smart, be wise, and survive the encounter, whatever that is. I think of Shatara and her husband. That story could have gone in a totally different way, and could have ended up a news story like so many others we've seen. But I really say it's not about your pride. It's not about saying all the things you kind of wish you could. It's really about surviving the encounter, so that you can still be there for your family, and so that you can still, continue the fight in other ways.
Yeah, I kind of like what you said about that, surviving the encounter. I kind of look at it as doing what you can and trusting God for the rest. One of the things, and I remember, I think me and a couple family members were having a discussion about this, is I know we talked about the talk. It's one of those things that you're given, especially as a Black man younger. The police pull you over, keep your hands 10 and 2 o'clock, have your license out on there, different things like that. And in order not to give a reason for someone to do anything. I think one of the things that was scary about that discussion for us is you have the talk, but sometimes we don't know what to say anymore because you've had different things. People killed, no-knock warrants at home. I can't remember the young lady in Texas who was I think she was in Texas, who was babysitting her nephew. She calls the police about a noise and they come in and they kill her. Different things like that. And so you start to sometimes, if you're not careful, just like, what do I do? One of the things I think about as a therapist and as I work with my clients and then even myself is I just control what I can. I talk to my sons, you control what you can. Be as respectful as you can. If there's something going on where there's a lot of trouble, don't come around because you're going to get looked at as a suspect probably beforehand. And then other than that, I say trust God for the rest, because at the end of the day, you still got to keep living. One of the things that was, I say frightful, but then educational about your story, Shatara, was you actually used the term bait. And I think it stuck out to me, was the fact that you figured out at some point that this person was harassing you to use you as bait because they really wanted to shoot your husband. As traumatic as it was, the beautiful thing is that you survived to be able to tell the story to educate us. And so a lot of times it's thinking about surviving so we can make a difference. And so that's what I generally focus on with me every day. And then even in talking to my sons, I say, how do you live purposefully every day and make yourself live that day so you can live the next day to continue what you believe your purpose is? So those are the things I try to work with and navigate.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. And unfortunately, this conversation can go on all day long. I know it can. But our time is about to wrap up. I thank each and every one of you panelists for sharing, because your stories are very heavy. And somebody mentioned a minute ago, we still have to take time to regroup. So not only are we Black men and women who experience racism or deal with these issues, but we got to take some time to regroup so we can be healthy enough to help somebody else today, because we're still therapists and people still are seeing us via telehealth or in the office or whatever you're doing where you're at. So making sure that you all take care of yourself. And I'm just grateful that you were on here. I'm grateful for Joe for the platform. I'm thanking for everyone that jumped on Zoom and sat through and listened. I thank you for those on Facebook, those that text me and connected with me. And there's a lot of thank yous coming through for sharing your story. I have to ask Joe, one of the questions we got too is that if we could, the panelists can get your website, LinkedIn, email information out for people who want to network and continue to conversate with you. And so I'll ask Joe about that, and I'll probably connect with you all just to see how we can get that information out for those that have further questions or dialogue with each of you for sharing. And then somebody else mentioned too what my takeaways were. I said in the beginning, I really wanted people to know that racism isn't new, right? It's not new to any of the five of you. You all told stories from years ago and then up to present. And there were so many more stories we could share. I wanted people to really, and that's for us too, just to examine our heart and see what's sitting there. I think a lot of times people are really quick to say, I'm not racist, or I love everybody, or, you know, I'm a Christian. Okay, you can be all those things. Well, you can be a Christian, right? And I think people sometimes don't understand that what racism is and the impact it is. And if your immediate response to everything is I'm not racist, that's not healthy, right? And then also talking about being triggered and with the understanding of, we hear all these stories and it's so heavy. We have to take care of ourselves, as Tara said too. Therapists need a therapist. So once again, I thank everybody for coming on and joining us. I thank Joe, the Practice of the Practice, for allowing us this space. We did record the video. I'm not sure how it will get out, but hopefully it will get out to people. And then you can also go to the Strong Witness Facebook page and watch the video and share it from there. All right. So you all, blessings to you all. I thank you so much. Thank you, Monique in Alaska, William in Atlanta, Malcolm in Virginia. I got it now. Shatar in Charlotte, and Holly in Philly. So thank you all for joining us, and I hope you all have a blessed day, okay?
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, everybody.